Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. So last time we ended off actually on this screen, and I wanted to pick up here. What we'll do is we'll keep walking our way through the Old Testament. We get up to the book of Joshua, right? Um, essentially, Moses in Deuteronomy instructed the people that were going to go into the land. These were people in Israel that were 19 years old and under, and also those that were born over the 40 years in the wilderness. So they needed to be instructed. Now, when Joshua brings them in the land, as you can see, this is actually a screen from a Joshua presentation I did. But what I wanted to show you is that when they get into the land, Joshua divides up the land. This is just some information on it. And then here on the left is what I want you to see. So notice we have 3 cities of refuge on the left and 3 basically on the right. So you have each of these cities, east and west of the Jordan River, because Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh settled outside the land. And then so Joshua now establishes these are cities that if somebody committed manslaughter, they could go and people could not take vengeance against them for, killing a family member or whatever. And then they were kind of equally distributed throughout the land. There were 48 cities that the Levites lived in scattered throughout the whole land. And but these cities of refuge were a place that people could go in safety and not have somebody take vengeance out against them. So obviously we have Joshua's farewell speech at the end of Joshua. So this is a good visual because, and I mainly put it up for the map, because it gives you an idea of where each of the tribes is in the land, and then kind of where the cities lay out in regard to that. Because as you read through the Old Testament and you'll read about these cities of refuge, it's important to know, A, they're there, B, why they're there, and C, where are they, right? And so you can see that God equally distributed them throughout the land. This is another way of looking at the Old Testament. And again, we're talking about chronology. So what we're going to focus on is a part of the Old Testament that tends to confuse people. So as you read through Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, especially if you pay attention, at some point in time, the kingdom becomes divided. And then all of a sudden, as a matter of fact, if you can see it in red, within the circle, it says Saul, David, Solomon. And that is the United Kingdom. The kingdom divides, and then you have 10 tribes on the north, 2 on the south to make up the full 12 tribes of Israel. But during that time, what the writers do is they will tell you who comes to power. Let me move on to this screen. So this is the United Kingdom. And so you have Saul, David, and Solomon. Those are the only kings at the time. Solomon's son Rehoboam, Solomon created a problem by the end of his life. His son Rehoboam was he was basically a spoiled kid, apparently, and just wanted to keep things the way they were. He was advised by Solomon's cabinet members to go easy on people because they had been in a very difficult position with Solomon. He had a very expensive government that needed a lot of support, so there was heavy taxation. And they said you should go easy on them. Apparently, Rehoboam ended up having conversation also with his college buddies or whatever, the younger guys, and they said, "Oh, stick it to them, get what you want." And so his lousy attitude towards governing over the people enabled a guy named Jeroboam take 10 tribes north. Now, God gave Jeroboam those tribes and actually made him a promise that if he was faithful to the law and obeyed God, that God would give his offspring a place in the Messianic dynasty and all that. But he didn't. He ended up putting Calf and Dan, the city of Dan and Bethel, up north, and said, "Behold, Israel, here are your gods." Now, he did that because he was afraid that the northern 10 tribes would go back to Jerusalem to worship. And if they did that and decided to be loyal to the tribe of Judah because they were controlling Jerusalem and Judea and the temple, then he would probably get killed. So basically what he did was he instituted calf worship up north, which was idolatry. He changed the feasts. He had false priests giving sacrifice, to these pagan deities, and so he was really creating almost an alternate Israel, and it was messing the people up pretty severely. Now, eventually, the capital up north becomes Samaria. So in the divided kingdom, we have 10 tribes up north, right? They had 20 kings. They were all idolatrous. They were all bad. The capital is Samaria. Now, by the time we get to the New Testament, we see that, Jesus goes by the well in John 4, talks to the Samaritan woman. She's shocked that he's talking to her where he's a Jew, because the Jews, they did not like the Samaritans. So because there's a reason why the Jews did not like the Samaritans. In 722 BC, Assyria took the top 10 tribes into captivity. And what they did, their practice was to repatriate the area up north. So essentially, they took people from other nations, put them up in the northern area of Israel, took people from the north, blended them into some other nations, because the goal is to break their national identity, their religious identity, their social connection, everything, so that they are really more pliable to Assyria, and have no way of kind of gathering together for some kind of revolt or anything like that. And pretty much what Babylon did when they overtook and brought like Daniel and his friends to Babylon, essentially the same kind of idea. So the Samaritans basically were half-breeds. I mean, they were intermixed with other races, many of them, and they also worship different gods, right? Jesus even said to the Samaritan woman, "You worship what you do not know, but salvation is of the Jews," right? So there was an intermix, and the Jews looked down on the Samaritans so much that he gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? The priests went to the other side of the road, the guy that needed help, but it was a Samaritan that came along and actually helped the guy. So, obviously, your breeding, like what your genealogy is, doesn't give you the in with God. Like, what are you doing to reach out and help, basically? But anyway, so this is what it looks like up north during the division. The northern tribes were called either Israel or Ephraim. Israel because it was the majority of the nation. Ephraim because it was the largest and most dominant tribe in the north. So the southern tribe was just Judah and Benjamin. And again, 20 kings, only 8 of them were good, 12 were idolatrous. Manasseh was among them. Manasseh was the worst king that reigned, and Manasseh reigned the longest, 55 years. Long time for a bad king. So, I mean, for many people, it was their whole lifetime. Obviously, the capital is Jerusalem, and they were taken into captivity by Babylon in 586. Babylon came down in 606 with their first swing. That's probably when Daniel and his friends got taken. And there was problems with, they put up just a kind of a vassal or a puppet king in Jerusalem. They had some problems with him, came down 10 years later, put up another one, and then eventually in 586, they came down and basically wiped it out. So that's when they were taken captive for 70 years. So this gives a layout of how 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st Kings overlays with 1st Chronicles and 2nd Chronicles. So this is kind of the money screen for the Old Testament, at least for Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. So once you get into, notice 2nd Chronicles starts a little bit into 1st Kings, okay? Because you're dealing with the life of David and on into Solomon. So once you get into 2nd Chronicles, it's really the rest of 1st Kings and 2nd Kings. You have Solomon's reign. You're into the 2 kingdoms and the different kings. Now, the way they end up figuring out who comes in when is through how the writers laid out. As a matter of fact, let me go to, let me find like in 2nd Kings. Probably should have done this before, but so let's see. This Jehu. All right. So notice here in verse 4, you can see that. So it says, in the 7th year, Jehoiada brought the captains, blah, 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 blah. And Joash is anointed king. So this is where Athaliah, who is basically Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, she is through marriage down in the southern kingdom. And she basically, she kills all her grandkids when her son dies because she doesn't want them to, she doesn't want any of them to take over as king. And so they end up hiding Joash, who ends up being a good king. He only is a good king as long as Jehoiada, the high priest, tells him what to do. You can read all that. However, let's see, when he comes to reign, right? Let's see. Maybe he wasn't the best one to pick. Let me back up here. Let's see. All right. So here's a better example. So Azariah, he comes up to reign, Uzziah, right? So it says, and I don't know if you can read, I think you can up top. It says in verse 1, in the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, the one on up north, okay? And there was 2 Jeroboams. There was the initial one. This is the 2nd Jeroboam. Azariah, the son of Amaziah, king of Judah, began to reign. So you walk 27 years into Jeroboam number 2, and all of a sudden you find, so as you can see, There's a Jeroboam 2 up top, just above where it says Ephraim, in the line of kings for the top, the northern kingdom. And then down below, see where it says Azariah and then in parentheses Uzziah. So basically, in the 27th year of Jeroboam number 2, Uzziah began to reign. I mean, that's essentially what we're looking at here. And it goes back and forth like that. So if you don't know that and you don't know the layout of the kings, what ends up happening is the Old Testament becomes very confusing. So as you read through Kings and Chronicles, and Kings gives you the political or the human view, where Chronicles gives you more of the divine or the priestly view. So the Chronicles focuses more on the kings of Judah, because that's the messianic line, right? The line of Judah, and the family of David. So that's really where most of the focus is. You'll typically get a little bit of different perspective, some more detail in certain stories, but it's why sometimes, you read through Kings and then you read through Chronicles and it's like, I feel like I've read this before, but there's a little bit added, okay? And it's because of perspective. It's kind of like when you get to the New Testament, you read Matthew, Mark, or Luke, and it's like, if you read Matthew, then you read Mark, it's like, well, I've read some of this before. Well, and you're getting a little different perspective. It's filling in gaps the other one didn't provide. So as you go through, though, it will tell you when the person began to reign. And that becomes important because it helps you understand which one it's talking about. So like here, notice he calls him Jeroboam, king of Israel, up north. It's either Israel or Ephraim. And Amaziah, king of Judah, down south in the southern kingdom. So that's, and let's see. Notice in verse 8 here, it says, in the 38th year of Azariah. Now, we're dealing with Azariah or Uzziah because he's the king. Well, up north, it says Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam, reigned over Israel and Samaria for 6 months. Didn't reign very long, but the point is that is how they are relating. So the stories, the events, they all are showing you who is in power. And it's important to know the opposing king in power. For example, when Ahab and Jezebel are reigning up north, during that time, Jehoshaphat, who was a good king, was reigning down south. But the problem is, through marriage, Jehoshaphat ends up, helping Ahab, and he ends up being, Jehoshaphat ends up being rebuked by a prophet because he's helping King Ahab, who is wicked, and they should not have been together. God made that clear. But anyways, you can read through all that yourself. That's part of, going through and making sure you understand it. So this is the layout. You can always take a screenshot of it or whatever. And then this screen provides kind of a high-level analysis. So we have the 8 good kings of Judah, okay? So on the left is the king. They arrive in the sequence that they become king. Asa being the first one, and then Josiah being the last. Probably the best king out of all of these is Hezekiah, okay? One of the other things that I meant to mention is up north, all the kings, as they come in, and I'll just back up here. So up north, each of them are compared in their wickedness back to Jeroboam number 1, okay? Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, you'll read that made Israel to sin, basically with the golden calves and the idolatry and everything else. So all that wickedness. And he's everybody is always compared back to him. However, when you get to Omri, Omri adds wickedness in on top of that. And then his son, Ahab, is even worse, okay? So then they start comparing people back to, Omri and Ahab, but they never get away from comparing them back to Jeroboam. Down south, the kings of Judah are always compared back to David. David may not have been a perfect person, but he was a good king in the sense that he never was idolatrous. He always loved God. He was always loyal to God. He never deviated from his loyalty. And so that's important as far as understanding him as a leader, because he becomes, in a sense, other than his own personal problems, a model king, okay? Because he battled for Israel and he did what he was told to do. So here, I want you to notice something. There's 4 kings that have reforms. They're kind of like revivals, but for the kings in those days under the law, that meant that they sent the priests out throughout the land, who are the Bible study teachers. Again, you have the civil leaders are the kings and the princes, right? The spiritual leaders are the priests, and the moral leaders are the prophets. The moral leaders were to kind of keep everybody in line. God would speak through the prophets to kind of straighten them out as they went. A lot of times you'll see the prophets were associated with certain kings. And then because the king was leading the nation. Now, if the king had a reform, in other words, if they were sending the priests out to teach the law so that people could understand it and obey it and everything else, then obviously within the law, they didn't allow idolatry. So one of the things is that notice where it says high places, they're removed, and it works with each one that had a reform. The high places were these elevated places that they used to worship these pagan gods. The famous one, other than Baal, was Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth was a fertility goddess that was kind of like the counterpart to Baal. And Ashtoreth was worshipped through basically a lot of, perverted sexual practices, lesbianism, homosexuality as means of prostitution, as well as heterosexual prostitution. There was all kinds of craziness. And they would have these really beautiful areas that were, nice gardens, and they would have these kind of perverted images of Ashtoreth, this female fertility goddess. And so they would go up there, do their thing, and then they would end up with unwanted babies. And so they would give birth to their babies, and then they would go into the valley of Tophet and offer their babies to Molech, which would essentially be putting them on an altar or the outstretched arms of a red hot idol and burn them to death. So they didn't have the abortion technology at that point. They had to wait for the child to be born, but they didn't burn them in the womb with a saline solution, but waited till they were born. Unconscionable wickedness, awfulness. As a matter of fact, the Valley of Tophet, it's actually the Valley of Hinnom, okay? They called it the Valley of Tophet in the Old Testament, which you can look up, because Tophet is the word for drums. It was the Valley of Drums because as they offered the babies and would be burning them to death and beheading them and all this awfulness, they would beat the drums to drown out the screams of the babies. They would walk through this, kind of corridor of fire to bring them, and a whole big ritual to make them feel good about offering their children to get rid of them because they didn't want them. And by the time Jesus came along, the Valley of Hinnom, or, the anglicized Gehenna, was the place, it was the garbage dump where the worm didn't die and the fire was never quenched. It was a place of awful stench and misery, like nobody wanted to go near there. Jesus metaphorically compared that to eternal hell, because everything that's tossed there is of no use anymore. Because, quite frankly, in eternal hell, those are people and demonic beings that are of no use to God anymore because they rejected the will of God. People will be there because it's like a quarantine. You get a virus on your computer, the software quarantines it so it doesn't wreck your computer. Well, that's what hell is in a sense. The wickedness, which is really embodied into people and spiritual angels that rebelled, has to be contained somewhere, because God's will is going to be exercised in his universe and beyond. And, they are not going to be allowed part in that. So they will be there for eternity. It is for eternity. It's not temporary, and it's not annihilation. I know that's kind of a popular thing to talk about today. But again, if you read the Bible for what it says, without getting into linguistic gymnastics that are valueless, then basically that's what it says. So, but anyways, I just wanted you to see. So, there is some detail on each of the kings and everything. And so you'll see here that, Josiah being the last one, he was the last good king, ended up fighting in a war he really didn't need to, and died in it, but probably should just never have gone there. So no king is perfect. They all had their failures, and but this gives you kind of a high level look at, especially the high places, whether they removed them or they kept them, because if they allowed them to remain, they were allowing idolatry to continue in an isolated circumstance. It's kind of like they didn't weed out the whole thing, and so the problem continued. So, and it's interesting, though there are other kings leafed in between these. Notice, once Joash allowed the high places, they never got taken away, because none of the kings were as interested in doing it, and they all had some pretty severe weaknesses until you get to Hezekiah, who didn't want to put up with it. Ironically, Hezekiah, when he was dying, Isaiah went to him and said, hey, put your house together, prepare to meet God, you're going to die. Hezekiah started crying to the Lord. He said, haven't I been a good king and everything else? And so essentially God gave him 15 more years. And then he ended up in that time frame having Manasseh, who was the worst king, and ended up reigning the 55 years. Now, Hezekiah, had he known that, I think he probably would have just died. But, you think you're going to, sometimes we think that we can do better than God's will. God tells us this is this is the best thing to do, and it's like, well, I think I have a better idea, or if you let me do this, I can do it better, and that doesn't always work. We saw that with Abraham, right? And so we don't always have to help God. Now, again, I understand why Hezekiah wanted to stay longer. There were many reasons for that, and some of them very legitimate, but the problem is he gave birth to a son that undid every single thing that he had done right. Manasseh did wrong. And as a matter of fact, the Hebrew history is the one that tells us that, like when you read in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, that some of the faithful people near the end of the chapter, it says, were sawn in two. That's speaking of Isaiah, because Jewish history tells us that Manasseh killed Isaiah by sawing him in half. I mean, this guy was as wicked as you get. So, anyways, Hezekiah lost basically everything that he had made to this kid, and it was some time before Josiah came, and this young kid had a heart for the Lord, and he put it all back again. So, but they end up going into captivity anyways. So there's the focus on those, right? All right, and you got no, and they remained. So this is the last chart I'm going to show you before we basically get into listing some of the Old Testament books, which we'll save for next time. But I want you to notice the way this chart shows the divided kingdom is the northern tribe is on the left and the southern tribes are on the right, and it follows on to basically the second page, obviously. So as you go down in this list, notice that it will show you during whose reign, so it's a good visual, what prophet was there. So obviously Elijah and Elisha really kind of kick off the prophets era, if you will. And though there were prophets before them, but when the kingdom was divided, it was important to have prophets to speak to the kings and those tribes for what they were, they needed to correct. So you have prophets on either side, right? So you have them on the, notice the blue arrow. From the center to the left, that means they're speaking to the northern tribes. And you get that in the beginning of these prophets' books anyways, they tell you. And then obviously center to the right. So you get that on, and you can see on the right side, same thing, both sides. Now, when you get down to Amos, which is on the left-hand side near the bottom, notice Amos is in the middle because he is speaking to both sides. Amos talks about national accountability, and so he actually speaks to both the north and the south. Hosea, however, is focused more on the north, okay, though addresses the south. And then as you get to, Isaiah and Micah, who for the most part were kind of contemporaries, they're just really speaking to the south. And as you can see on the right-hand side up top, you get the other prophets there. And then you're notice that the northern tribes, Hoshea is the last king on the bottom left on the left-hand side. And then so you don't have any more prophets speaking to them. Really all the other prophets, if you look on the right, you have Daniel, Ezekiel. They are really, they are speaking into, they start prior to, but then into the 70-year captivity. Now, Joel is placed down here on this chart by rows, and where I get the chart. And there's a question mark. I think that Joel really needs to be up around the end of Isaiah. Fits much better. I don't know why they have him at the end like that. He was not after Malachi. Malachi is later. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and then the three narratives are Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. That's after the captivity. So that should help. Anyways, hopefully that's instructive. It's kind of brought us through the Old Testament as a timeline. And if certainly if you have any questions, just email me at BibleMadeClear@gmail.com, and I'll try to answer them for you. But other than that, we'll kick off next time with a list of the Old Testament books and just kind of a quick walkthrough. If you have any particular Old Testament books you're concerned about what the kind of brief overall message is or what the focus is, we should be able to answer it next time. So until next time, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.